현재 잼버조는 님미정 돈을 모는 잼버는 가져다 바크라 다른 산도 실물도 돈바 특제장라 기시험 차를 내 천러버스는 이장감선 작업 특기션도 열라 지금 판소장라 소란
Thus, the past profound and wonderful Dharma's difficulty encountering billions of aeons, I now see it here to receive and uphold it, vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Today, let us continue with our class on the Surangama Sutra. Compared to the wish-fulfilling treasury, I think this is probably a little bit more difficult to understand. However, the content of Surangama Sutra is indeed quite intriguing. So I do hope that throughout the study of the Surangama Sutra, do not get tired and do not get the mind of letting it go, do not get the mind of retrogression. Whenever and whatever kind of Dharma that you're studying, we need to be diligent all the way from the beginning till the end. We need to persevere all the way through. This is the kind of spirit of seeking for the genuine Dharma. We have already studied that previously in the Surangama Sutra with the conversations between the Buddha and Venerable Ananda. The Buddha expounded the teaching to Ananda, but Ananda is still holding on to words and holding on to conceptual mind. So the Buddha started saying that, why then do you cheat yourself and so remain caught up in looking and listening? The group of female practitioners such as Yashodhara and the Matangi's daughter had already attained the noble fruition. Now you, as a bhikshu, are still having the dualistic thoughts. You're still very much caught up in looking and listening, in studying and contemplating. This is quite pitiful. Indeed, maybe each and every one of us have very different level of diligence and a very different level of insights. Some people, though, studied a bit later, but it may seem that the practice are quite easy for them to coincide, so that they would be able to develop more of insight in a short period of time. But there are people, after listening to the Dharma for many, many years, the transformation on that person may not be that apparent, and sometimes it may be retrogression on that person, even wrong views and started slandering the Dharma. There are situations like such. It is because everyone's capacity is different, everyone's root is different. It is simply natural that it would happen. So for each and every one of us, it is quite important for everyone to engage in the actual practice. This is quite crucial. And then the sutra states, when Ananda and the great assembly heard the Buddha's instruction, their doubts and delusions were dispelled. Their minds awakened to the actual appearance. They experienced the light ease, both physically and mentally, and then they obtained what they had never had before. All of the disciples, Ananda, great Maha Bodhisattvas and Arhats, the great assembly, including the four groups of disciples, after listening to the teaching of the Buddha, their confusions and doubts, let it be coarse or subtle, have now been dispelled. Mainly, the doubts and afflictions are now dispelled. It says that their minds awaken to the actual appearances. Over here, this awakened is not the full awakenment like the Buddha. It's not the full enlightenment that is like the Buddha's. Rather, it is that they are awakened to the importance of the practice, and they gained understanding on Tathagata on the Dharma of causes and conditions. And then their physical body as well as mentally, this group of disciples, including Ananda, felt this light ease that they had never had before. This group of disciples of the Buddhas must be of very sharp capacity, because look at us. After we finish classes, we finish attending classes and listening to the Dharma teachings, do you feel this light and ease in your physical body and in your mind? I think nowadays this kinds of direct experience are much less than that when we used to listen to the teachings from Pongso Rinpoche. Whenever Pongso Rinpoche give teachings on the Buddhist logic, on the Madhyamika, on the Vajrayana teachings, after listening to these classes that's given by His Holiness, both our physical body and our mind would generate a sense of insight. I don't dare to say it's a full awakenment, but at least we would generate a great faith and joy to listening to those Dharma teachings. Those kinds of senses are quite strong, are quite noticeable, and we would feel that this Dharma teaching is so supreme and important, and naturally we would be infused in that situation. But nowadays, it seems that lots of you who are listening to the classes are finishing a task. You're burdened by this task. It seems that you have no genuine appreciation and no genuine insights about those Dharma teachings. I can see that many of you are not really listening or not really making any notes. I feel that is not very meaningful for you to attend classes. Though that we cannot compare ourselves to Venerable Ananda and great disciples like such, whom after listening to the teachings of the Buddha would right away have a great transformation. Though we cannot compare ourselves to the great disciples of the Buddha, but at the time of listening to a Dharma teaching, we need to pay attention. It is just like listening or attending a symposium. Each and every one of the presenters' eloquence would be different, but even if someone stutters, could give information that can be beneficial to you. So it would be the best for you to listen attentively. Because if you were to listen attentively and enters into others' wisdom, it is still quite meaningful. And this also applies to tutoring sessions and so on. In the sutra, it says that once again he wept, bowed at the Buddha's feet, knelt on both knees, placed his palms together, and said to the Buddha, "The unsurpassed, great, compassionate, pure, and precious King has instructed me well, so that by means of these various causes and conditions, expedients, and encouragements, all of us who were immersed in the sea of suffering have escaped it." Now Ananda teared up for the 5th time. Throughout the Surangama Sutra, Master Yuan Ying in his commentary counted that this is the 5th time that Ananda teared up. The first time was when he was disrupted by the Matangi's daughter and returned back to the Sangha. And facing the Buddha, Ananda at that time feeling quite upset that he didn't have the capacity of dealing with the situation, disregard how much he had studied and learned. So he started crying in front of the Buddha. And then in between, there were a few times when Ananda didn't understand the sacred meaning of the Buddha, so he cried. And then there were a few different times afterwards. This is now the 5th time of the tearing up of the Buddha. Usually we say that men don't shed tears easily. It is only when at the most grief times men would tear up. But some men I know, they like to cry as well. They tear up quite easily, especially when I would reprimand them. I remember that very clearly, and I know how many times they cried. Maybe some of the staff members probably cried over 5 times. Anyhow, at that time, Ananda cried. without having any aggression or wrong view. Rather, he right away knelt on both of his knees, placed his palms together, and said to the Buddha, "The unsurpassed, great, compassionate, pure, and precious King." This is the titles that Ananda addressed the Buddha. So the most supreme, the most wonderful, unsurpassed Buddha, would you please instruct me well, so that by means of these various causes and conditions, expedients, those metaphors, those skillful means and encouragements, all of those instructions that you had bestowed us, all of those adjectives, or all of those were the methods that the Buddha used to guide the disciples. Sometimes he would give examples, stories, and metaphors. Sometimes he would give the expedient debates, and sometimes it would be skillful means of reprimands and criticism, and sometimes use all kinds of instructions to guide them at various situations, so that the sentient beings that's immersed in the ocean of suffering would be able to escape this ocean of samsara. And then Ananda continued to address the Buddha, saying that, "World-honored one, having heard the sound of the Dharma like this, I know that the treasury of the thus come one, the wonderful enlightened bright mind, pervades the 10 directions and includes the thus come one, the lands of the 10 directions, and the pure precious adornments of the land of the wonderfully enlightened King." He said that now we have received such a supreme sound of the Dharma like this, including the sounds of your criticism, that when you said that I cannot compare to the female practitioners, I finally understand that the treasury of the thus come one, which refers to the Dharmakaya, that is wonderful, enlightened, bright mind, which pervades the 10 directions. This 10 directions, this lands of the 10 directions refers to the Nirmanakaya, while the Dharmakaya is unwavering, abiding in purity. The Nirmanakaya would manifest in the lands of the 10 directions. And then Ananda continues to say that the pure, precious adornments of the land of the wonderfully enlightened King, over here it refers to the pure land of the wonderfully enlightened King, which is the Sambhogakaya pure land. So Ananda says that, well, the Tadakatagarbha can manifest in the methods of the 3 kayas, or in the ways of the 3 kayas. And then he continued to say that, yet the thus come one once again admonishes that the irradiation is of no merit and is not as good as cultivation. Over here, what it means is that those kinds of erudite studying and contemplation and so on and so forth is not as good as practice. Those kinds of reprimands are so important. We should listen to this as well. Sometimes many of us are very similar to Ananda. Throughout the studying of Surangama Sutra, my personal feeling is that I can empathize with Ananda from time to time. Sometimes I really understand where Ananda's questions are from. And sometimes I feel that maybe Ananda is changing quite a bit, and these questions can be difficult to understand. Though that we don't have such kind of a high realization as Ananda, but sometimes we can share the similar questions, and sometimes we could feel his questions can be a little bit confusing too. Ananda also changes from time to time. On one hand, sometimes he could be quite happy, and once he understands the teaching, he would appreciate and pay gratitude to the Buddha. And when he got confused, he would get quite upset. I think we can definitely empathize with that feeling of Ananda as well. Over here, he says that the Buddha once again criticized me and pointed out that the erudite contemplation and study is not of any meaning without actual practice. And then he continued to say that, so now I am like a wanderer who suddenly encounters a reigning king who bestows upon him an elegant house. Ananda here gives an example saying that by having the criticism and knowing that listening is not as meritorious as actual practice, it is just as a wanderer all of a sudden encountered by the reigning king and receive a grand mansion. He continued to say that he has obtained a mansion, but there needs to be a door in order for him to enter. According to the commentary, it says that the reigning king is the Buddha, and this grand mansion is the Dharma door, or the particular teaching of Tathagata. Ananda says that I have already received such kinds of precious thing that is the mansion, or precious teaching that is the teaching of Tathagata. After receiving this, in order to enter it, we need to still have the key to enter this mansion, without which the mansion would simply be meaningless or not of any true benefit. Though that we have received lots of Dharma teachings, if we do not engage in the actual practice of the Dharma, then we would not be able to enter into this grand mansion and receive great benefits. That is why a little while ago I've specifically give you this practice requirement. I understand our 5G thesis classes would hardly spare much time to engage in daily practice. That is not very practical for you to do so. But as a whole Sangha over here, let it be the 5G thesis class or the other classes, it is still crucial to engage in group practice or to dedicate some of your personal time to engage in the formal meditation, especially our practice classes. If you want to engage in the actual practices, you need to spend lots of time, a great deal of time to engage in the actual practice. My suggestion to the other classes, such as the Pure Land class, if you can practice abiding, that would be great. If you can abide, that's wonderful. If you can't, then chanting mantras of Amitabha, of the Avalokiteshvara, and so on and so forth are good, because the seniors at the time of practicing meditation sometimes could lead to drowsiness. There is such possibility. I'm not forcing you to sit there all the time, but I think as practitioners, especially those of you who are in the actual practice class, because you do not have exams, then you need to practice daily for 8 hours at least. It would be the best for you to practice 8 hours a day to engage in the actual practice. 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, and 2 hours in the morning class, and then 2 hours in the afternoon class. Or if you have classes, then you can have a 1 hour group meditation. If you really couldn't engage in the 8 hours, then 6 hours is fine as well. It seems that we have more and more people engaged in the actual practice class, but it seems that some of you are enrolling in those classes because you are trying to get away from exams. In this way, it is really deceiving yourself. Just look at Ananda. He is already such a very diligent practitioner. The Buddha still reprimands him by saying that you're simply deceiving yourself. So if we are if we are already enrolled in the actual practice class or actual studying contemplation class, you do need to practice and study. Look at those people who are in the study and contemplation classes. They would get up really early and start reciting and memorize the text very early in the morning. And they have lots of pressure coming from engaging in exams. If you do not have any pressure in the actual practice class, I don't think that's reasonable. You need to spend time to meditate. At the beginning, maybe just 15 minutes or half an hour could be difficult, but if you were to truly practice, and after you get used to it, then 1 hour, 2 hours would be easy, would be simple. After 15 days of retreat that we recently had, I think you're already getting more used to it. Now we have more and more people enrolled in the actual practice classes, so those of you should already have the key to enter into this mansion. I think when we look at those Zen practitioners, the Chan practitioners, the group practice can be considered as a very popular and necessary way of engaging in practice. Recently, it's a little bit difficult to do so, but it is necessary. Throughout history, we can read all kinds of stories of the practitioners who would get in groups and practice meditation. There's the 7-day retreat, 7 days group retreat. This is quite essential. At the beginning, of course, people would feel a great deal of pressure. I think sometimes those kinds of pressure are necessary because without pressure, people tend to get too relaxed. And if we were to have more pressure for the practice class, then those people who can't engage those hours or put that much effort into their actual practices will no longer stay for the actual meditation classes, which would be good for the management in general. The Khenpos and Khemos, I would call up on you to make a better regulation and a better management. The Khenpos and Khemos, I would ask you to send me a plan and invite me to your meeting so that I can review your plans. After that meeting, you would discuss further about the current status and the level of practice of your disciples. And you can further talk about why many more people would like to join your group. Is it because they truly want to attain liberation, or is it because your classes lack certain structures and it is easy for them to slack off? You need to find the reasons for it. Otherwise, it would be just like what the Buddha pointed out to Ananda. It is simply deceiving others and deceiving oneself. Ananda continued to say that I only hope that the thus come one will not withhold his great compassion in instructing those of us in the assembly who are covered over by darkness, so that we may renounce the small vehicle and attain at last the thus come one's nirvana without residue, the fundamental path of resolve. Over here, he states that all of us who's been covered by the afflictions of ignorance May the great compassionate Buddha do not abandon us. May your great compassionate instructions would lead us to instruct us so that we can renounce the small vehicle and attain the nirvana that is without residue. Over here, Ananda said that I am making, in fact, Ananda already made the aspiration, but now he's making the aspiration again. It is similar to us. We would chant those aspiration sadhana every single day, but after that, whenever we encounter some actual situations, we would forget about our aspiration. But over here, Ananda again and again asks the Buddha to bestow his great compassion so that they would let go and renounce the small vehicle and attain the nirvana without residue. Ananda continued, and that he will enable those who still must study to know now how to subdue the age-old seeking of an advantage from conditions to obtain dharani. Over here it says that to eradicate those kinds of coarse and subtle graspings of seeking of advantage from conditions. In the Tibetan translation, such kinds of grasping has been translated as habitual tendencies. It means that through what kind of method can we eradicate and purify such severe habitual tendencies and finally attain the pure dharani, which means total retention, such as the retention of not forgetting and so on, so that we can also enter into the knowledge and vision of the Buddha. Over here, Ananda means that this group of people of us, after making the aspiration of supreme Bodhi and seeking for the supreme fruition of Buddhahood, may we purify ourselves, all of our past habitual tendencies and dualistic thoughts, to attain the pure dharani and enter into the knowledge and vision of the Buddha. Just as sometimes whenever we encounter great masters, we would request them, please grant me blessings so that my beginningless karmic retributions can be purified and I would be able to see the nature of my mind and attain Buddhahood. Please grant me blessings. We usually would do so and make such great aspirations. But some may be rather quite poor. Yesterday when I was attending the after-class presentations and discussion groups, a female monastic, because she was wearing monastic clothing, told me that she doesn't want to get ordained right now. I'm not sure if she has some mental issue right now or not, or maybe she wants to get derobed. Anyhow, sometimes when we have this eagerness to get ordained and get really eager to see the nature of our mind, especially when you have great opportunities, you need to make the resolve of seeing the nature of your true mind and truly expel all the afflictions in your mind stream. If we were to have such eagerness and longing, then under those kinds of impetus of such kind of mindset, we would definitely be able to develop a capacity. So our practice, our level of insight is very much relying on ourselves. There are people who are quite courageous and make the resolve that they are going to practice very well. Let it be making supplications to Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, or practice the pure perception to the teachers and sanghas. Their minds are very pure and quite positive and have less of those negative information, but there are people who tend to be exactly the opposite. For those people who are quite negative, that has the wrong view and break their vows vows and so on and so forth, even if the spiritual teacher were to stand in front of you, even if multiple spiritual teachers would stand in front of you because of your negative karma accumulated from your previous lifetimes, even if those spiritual teachers were to beat you and were to give you the most direct pointing out of the nature of your mind from the Mahāti, those kinds of people will not be able to attain any kinds of insights, but maybe get even worse through those supreme instructions. But at that time, Ananda, after supplicated in front of the Buddha with great sincerity, he kept on thinking that, can we eradicate all of our past karmic tendencies? Can we completely purify all of them? He, after speaking that, after said that, he made a full prostration, and together with the members of the assembly, he single-mindedly awaited the Buddha's compassionate instructions. Ananda over here, after cried for 5 times, and he had such great respect to the Buddha, on one hand with great eagerness and really longing to attain understanding, and so sincere, kept on asking questions. He prostrated to the Buddha for many times and cried for a few times. Let's see if Ananda will cry again later on in this text. Sometimes the relationship between the guru and disciple, the teacher and disciple, may fluctuate. When the Lama Soden, who was the supervisor of the Sangha back then, or management of the Sangha back then, used to making observations of Pongsugo Rinpoche, and he would be very observant at the happiness or the mood of the teacher of that day. But the guru is not necessarily quite influctuate in their mood. It's really not that simple. Anyhow, Ananda, at that time, he must got quite tired and single-mindedly waiting for the instruction from the Buddha. He then states that the world-honored one then took pity on the sound-hearers and conditioned enlightened ones in the assembly, all those who were not yet at ease with the Bodhi mind, and on all living beings to come after the Buddha's extinction during the Dharma ending age. He reviewed the wonderful path of the cultivation of the unsurpassed vehicle. Out of the great compassion of the Buddha, he gives the teaching to the disciples whom upholds the disposition of the Shravakas and the Pratika Buddhas, also those of disciples who are still mundane beings, as well as in the translation of Tibetan language, as well as the commentary, it points out to the disciples who have not attained full liberation, the ones who have not attained bodhicitta is the definition of the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas. Not only the Buddha benefited the group of disciples who listened to his teachings at the time, he also benefited the sentient beings of the future dark age, of all of us, of the sentient beings now. Also, such Dharma will continuously to benefit the future generation, the future sentient beings. Though that we don't have the convenience as how we used to have, but nowadays, because of the continuous changes of time, the audios and videos, the sutras and the teachings given by great masters, I'm sure there are more advanced technologies that could further preserve their teachings. Let it be the textbooks or audiobooks and videos. Those digitization of those teachings definitely worth our consideration and our effort so that we can preserve them. The future ages could be better than what we are now, or could be worse. I sometimes contemplate to myself that my time is coming to an end. It is because I am already at this age, and I have been talking about that to all of you. Maybe after a few years, the conditions may be more favorable, but I have this flesh body. It could be not very much usable later. It is just a natural law. I think many of us who are here, we need to seek for the next generation of the upholders of Dharma, because in our day and time, whatever happened, I have tried my best. I have no regret whatsoever. I have tried my best in translation, in giving teachings, in my service to the Sangha, in serving as a management role, or in my service of making constructions of the shrine halls. In various aspects, as a mundane being like me, I have tried my best and made some contributions. Some may have come to a fruition, some may not. Whatever the result may be, I have tried my very best. And I am trying my very best to prepare for the next generation, and we should do that too. To further preserve those resources and information to the future generations. It could be audio, could be video, could be text. This could be meaningful, may not be, but it could be meaningful. So we need to contemplate further in that way. The Buddha often thinks of the future generations in the Dark Age, including when we study the Kshitigarbha Sutra. And then the Buddha continued to say that he proclaimed to Ananda and to the Great Assembly, if you want to have the decisive resolve for the Bodhi, for the bodhicitta, and not grow weary of the wonderful samadhi of the Buddha, the thus come one, you must first understand the two resolutions regarding initial resolve for enlightenment. What are the two resolutions regarding to the initial resolve for enlightenment? Then over here, the Buddha started saying that if you want to make the resolve for bodhicitta, if you want to aspire for bodhicitta, you have to be quite persistent. You have to have this firm resolve. Do not be tiresome throughout. All of us sitting here, we need to contemplate whether we're good practitioners. Our meditation samadhi, the great samadhi that is the Surangama Samadhi, by upholding those kinds of practices, we should not be tiresome. Since the lay practitioners do have lots of graspings and worldly concerns, compared to that, as the monastics, we really should strive to practice. Of course, except those of the monastics feels uncomfortable to be monastics. But my question is that what your initial aspiration is? You got ordained because you want to be comfortable? Anyhow, for the majority of you, as monastics, you definitely need to make the aspiration of bodhicitta to engage in the actual practice. This is your duty. You need to definitely shoulder it. There are two resolves, two aspirations. If you want to be a true Mahayana practitioner, you need to make the aspiration for bodhicitta and not get tiresome to meditation. And then in order to do that, there are two results. What are the two then? You have to be very firm about that. When we studied the aspiration, we usually talk about the aspiration of cause and the aspiration of fruition. In terms of Ananda, he's been fettered by grasping, and he would hold on to the causes and fruitions being solid because he has such kinds of dualistic thoughts. And he would hold on to the afflictions being truly existent. Aspire to benefit the others, seeking the ultimate Bodhi. Over here it talks about the two types of aspiration of bodhicitta, that is, seeking the fruition of Buddhahood and to benefit sentient beings. The teaching over here could be a little bit difficult. Now let's look at the first one, the two resolves. The first one is the resolve on the cause ground and the enlightenment, which is on the ground of fruition. The Buddha over here continued to tell Ananda, saying that the first resolution is this: if you wish to renounce the position of sound hearers and cultivate the bodhisattva vehicle, and to enter the knowledge and vision of the Buddha, you must carefully consider whether the resolve on the cause ground and the enlightenment on the ground of fruition are the same or different. So the first resolve is that if all of you want to give up the sound hearer and the particular Buddha's vehicle, but enter into the vehicle of bodhisattva, at that time, you need to make the observation very carefully. That is the observation of the cause ground and fruition ground. These two the same or different? Ananda thinks that these two are definitely different because the aspiration at the cause ground would be of conceptual mind, and the fruition ground is without the conceptual, without conception. He is contemplating in such a way, but the Buddha did not agree with him. He said that because if you were to say that the mind at a causal ground is impermanent and the mind at the fruition ground is permanent, then these two is not the same. So over here, the Buddha pointed out that at the stage of causal ground, the sentient beings already have a Buddha nature. At the ground, at the fruit ground, fruition ground, it is only the manifestation of it. There is not a new Buddha nature that appears at that time. So this is the main teaching that the Buddha gives. And then the Buddha continued to say that Ananda, it is impossible while on the causal ground to use the mind subject to production and extinction as the basis for cultivating in quest of the Buddha vehicle, which is neither produced nor extinguished. Over here, the Buddha explained very clearly, saying that, well, what you're thinking now is that at the causal ground there is a mind that has birth and death, or production and extinction. At the fruition ground, after you attained the fruition, there is the without production or without extinction kind of enlightenment. But that is simply impossible. However, the common vehicle as well as the realist schools usually would consider that there is the causal connection between enlightenment and the enlightened being or the Buddha with the sentient beings. Anything above the Vajrayana schools would consider there is no causal conditions. The sentient beings are the Buddhas. This is the teaching that's taught over here. So over here it says that the mind that has production and extinction to start with, and then seeking for a mind that is without production and without extinction is completely impossible, which is very difficult for the mundane beings to accept. And then the Buddha continued to say that for this reason, you should realize that all existing dharmas in this material world will decay and disappear. Ananda, contemplate on this world. What thing is there that will not waste away? All of the Dharma in this world, can you see that there is something that is without production and without extinction? There is not. But has anyone ever heard of the disintegration of the void, of the space, that is? Why not? Has anyone heard that someone destroyed space? Why not? It is because the void does not exist, and so it can never be destroyed. On one hand, our materialistic world can be destroyed, it can be wasted away, but the space cannot. So the Buddha started expounding the conditioned Dharma that has production and has extinction. At the same time, the Buddha nature is just like space that is not with production without extinction, which is just like our Buddha nature is just like space. We have never heard someone saying that, oh, the space has been destroyed, being cut, the space is dead, is ill, is not happy. There is no such description, no such thing like such. For the same reason, the nature, our nature is the Buddha nature. The Buddha said that why not? It is because the space is void and does not exist. It is simply unconditioned. So it does not have a beginning or an end. Therefore, there is no destruction to it. It cannot be destroyed. There is no distinction to it, which means the nature of our mind is just like such. Over here, the Buddha mainly expounded on the causes and fruition, and now the Buddha will continue to talk about the 5 turbidities, the 5 defilements, which is a little bit different than how we would usually talk about it. In terms of the 5 defilement, there's the defilement of the body, and then in terms of the example, let's look at the body aspect. Previously, we said that since the material world has destruction, but the space cannot have destruction, cannot be destroyed. When it comes to the materialistic world, the Buddha used the body of the sentient beings, which is formed by the 4 great elements, could have destruction, could have defilements. But our mind does not have destruction. This is the logic that the Buddha uses over here, which is a little bit difficult to understand. And then the Buddha said over here, while you're in your body, what is solid is of earth, what is moist is of water, and what is warm is of fire, and what moves is of wind. So these are the 4 great elements. The solid part, such as our bones, are of the elements of earth, and then all of the blood and the pus and all the liquid in our body are of the element of water, and then the temperature of our body is of the element of fire, and the movements of the body, such as breathe and all kinds of movements, is related to the great elements of wind. This is in terms of the 4 great elements, and our body is formed of the 4 great elements. The Buddha continued to say that because of these 4 bonds, your tranquil and perfect, wonderfully enlightened, bright mind divides into seeing, hearing, cessation, and cognition, from beginning to end, where there are the 5 layers of turbidities. Because of the 4 fetterments, that is our body, and the 4 fetterments that is made of the 4 great elements, for such causes and conditions, it then separates it separates us from our bright and wonderfully enlightened mind. These 4 great elements are simply the causes and conditions that disturbs our mind stream, our true nature. Our body divides ourselves to this pure and perfect and constant Buddha nature. And that is why there is seeing from our eyes and hearing from our ears and smelling from our nose and taste from our tongue. Also the smelling from our nose. The smelling from the nose, right? And then the tactile, the touching sensation from the body. Also cognition. From mind consciousness, those are the 6 places and 6 entrances. So all of those kinds of phenomena, the form, sound, smell, fragrance, and touch, which forms the 5 layers of turbidity. The 5 turbidities are a little bit different than how we usually explain it. The Buddha nature, when it comes to the sentient beings like us, when we talk about the 4 great elements, when we think about how each and every one of us would rely on the 4 great elements, there are the 5 turbidities, but everyone could have a very different situation of relating to that. Let's look at turbidity. What is turbidity? The Buddha over here gives an example to further explain turbidity. The Buddha said that what is meant by turbidity? Ananda, pure water, for example, is fundamentally clear and clean. The water, let it be spring or some mineral water, some very pure water. For the water itself is completely pure. It is pure and clear. And then, whereas dust, dirt, ashes, silt, and the likes are basically solid substances. So some sand, dust, and dirt, ashes, which upholds the nature of solidity. But the water's nature is pure and clean and clear. And then those dusts upholds the nature of solid substances, such kinds of solidity. Such are the properties of the 2. The nature of the water and the nature of dusts. Their natures are not compatible. Their natures are not the same. They cannot be compatible or cannot emerge into each other. They do not uphold the same property. We usually would say that the water and fire are not mixing together. But over here, the example points out that the nature of water and nature of earth are also different, completely different. The Buddha continued to say that, suppose then that an ordinary person takes some dirt and tosses it into pure water. When I was little, I remembered the young kids in my class used to be really naughty. We used to prank the teacher by dropping a little of the yak stone into the tea of the teacher, and the teacher would drink the tea really happily like such, but the kids would secretly laugh. This is what the naughty kids would do. So nowadays, when I look at naughty kids, I know how that was when I was little. Over here, it says that when the ordinary person, the mundane beings, take some dirt and toss it into pure water, the dirt loses its solid quality and the water is deprived of its transparency. The dirt would merge into the water, and then the water would lose its quality of transparency. The cloudiness, which is a result And that kind of result is called turbidity. Your 5 layers of turbidities are similar to it. Over here, when the water and dust were mixed together, these two materials that's mixed together, then the pure water is turbid, and the dust and dirt has melted into the water, dissolved into the water. So now we get this very turbid material. So what the Buddha is trying to point out that the body that is mixed with the Buddha nature, after it's been mixed together, it becomes this thing that it cannot be pointed to either of them.
看到好像没有直接的意思，就绒毛固然的话，那就是它意思是，这个它的这个颜色
The color and the shape, the form has been mixed together. After it's been mixed together, this is called turbidity. The 5 layers of turbidities are exactly the same. So when I explain the 5 layers of turbidities, they're all like that. In the next class, we will further explain this. We'll stop here today.